This week we really hit the jackpot on jokes. They were cracking them left and right. Big deal.
If you haven't seen this week's episode of BattleBots, consider this your warning. We're about to discuss all kinds of spoilers.
This week we talk to Jonathan Schultz from Huge after their first win of the season. We hear from David from Ribbot, and he talks about some amphibians. And we hear from Zach and Diana from Skorpios after beating the legendary Tombstone.
I'm Will Bales from Hypershock.
We're Mike and Andrea Galately from Team Witch Doctor.
And this is a Tale of the Tape after show. Welcome to the Tale of the Tape after show. Let's jump right into our 30-second recap.
30 seconds on the clock.
Huge does it like they do on the Discovery Channel in their fight against Kraken, and puppies ran amok for some reason. Ribbot goes in for one more hit and almost knocks themselves out of the arena. Rotator relishes his first win of the season.
Jackpot kicks the legend out of Lockjaw. Bloodsport cleans Cronus's clock. Fusion makes their practice fight look easy. And Skorpio smashes its face into Tombstone's weapon over and over again until the king of Connecticut energy loses a wheel.
On tonight's first deep dive, we're going to be talking about Huge versus Kraken. I was so surprised to see Kraken actually get a bite on Huge during this fight.
Yeah, it was a good fight for Huge, having such a rough start against Mammoth and Hydra. So yeah, it was great to see them, really getting some hits in.
But Kraken held up and lasted the full 3 minutes. I was really impressed. Kraken is a beast of a machine. But let's hear from Jonathan Schultz about his first win of the season.
Huge was originally inspired by the Robot Wars robot Gabriel. Had a really famous fight with another robot called Carbide, and it used kind of a similar giant wheel, but without any cutouts in it. And it was really resistant to the other spinners. And we saw that, and I had just finished building a different vertical spinning robot, small one, more Witch Doctor shaped. And I wanted to smash the two of them together. I thought it would just be an idea that could change things up, an idea that might be able to hit people from a new direction and give people something they've never seen before. So Huge started out as a 30-pound combat robot, and it's for the local Northeast events such as Motorama or Franklin Institute. So it was the parts we had at the time, it was what we could afford at the time, and it was the event we knew we could go to at the time. So we debuted Huge at the 30-pound level. It did very well. From then on, we went and built Tiny Huge, which was a 3-pound robot, about this big. And using Huge 30-pounder and Tiny Huge was basically how we figured out somewhat how to build this kind of design. Like when you scale it up, the motors are going to change. Obviously how big everything is going to change, but the wheels are effectively the same idea. How the center section is held together in each Huge is the same idea. And a lot of other things are consistent. So we can try out new wheel shapes or new wheel materials, different leg shapes, different leg materials. For example, the first Huge, if you look at it now, the bar and the wheels are all the way at the front of the frame and it kind of trails behind. The very first Huge wasn't like that. The wheels and the bar were in the dead center of the frame. So the frame was sticking 3 or 4 inches in front of the bar, and it was just from building it and fighting other people with it and getting hit in the front chin that we realized by sliding the frame back 2 or 3 inches, we'll have more reach to be able to hit people without them being able to hit us. And it's the things like that that also help you have some confidence in the shape and the design, and that's what allows us to, we built it in a month the first time, and it's because we knew what we were aiming for. And when I got to BattleBots with no driving practice on that robot, I knew how to drive a Huge because I'd driven the other Huges in the other fights. So it's really, it's what got us up to the peak of the learning curve before arriving at BattleBots, rather than having to put a season or two into figuring out what we even want the robot to look like, on top of figuring out the components and how to compete at the heavyweight level. So once again, Huge for 2020 was all new, every part besides the wheels and a few of the support legs in the back and the eyes. So what we did this year was every motor inside the robot is brushless now. We use much smaller but equally powerful motors, and they're the same motors for weapon and drive. Because of this, our drive is geared better and properly. So now we're 15 miles an hour instead of, I think, geared for 27, which was last year, and never had the power to get that, obviously. So it resulted in a really slow, wandering drivetrain last year. This year it really moves good. And then on the weapon as well, just taking up less space in the frame. We use that weight to put into better armor. So a lot of the support plates are thicker for the weapon because we were having some flexing there last year. And also in the drive axles are thicker, which means that the frame is now completely reversible. So you can just, bolt in the drive on either side or bolt in the weapon on either side. And it's better for spares for us. And also the bar got 10 pounds heavier with some of the weight that we saved. So it's just about that tuning. It's the same huge that it's always been. It's the same huge look. It's the same huge strategy, but whole new robot just to try and get that extra level of performance out of it. So Huge's wheels this season aren't entirely different than the wheels we had last year. Our main classic Huge wheels that we've run in all of our fights so far this season are the exact same wheels that we were running last season. It's a very general purpose design. We run it against vertical spinners. We run it against smaller spinners. We run it against control bots, etc. Otherwise, we have a thinner, almost fully solid wheel, and that was to be a bit more floppy. We made those before fighting Gigabyte last year, after the failure of the wheels against Sonobayashi. And otherwise, we have a new wheel that we have tested on Tiny Huge. It's a different material. It's a black kind of carbon fiber looking weave material. And you should see those later this year at some point. But it's a new material. We tested it in Tiny Huge and it worked great. And that was what gave us the confidence to make the jump and make wheels like that for the big robot. So that's something, if you look in the background of the main event interviews, you can see those wheels in the background over people's shoulders because we had them out and we had a lot of people asking questions about them all event. So we've been a little cagey, a little secret about the material and about what how we originally discovered the material and how the testing went. But suffice to say, it was a real game changer on Tiny Huge for fighting horizontal spinners. They're super tough. They're a lot stiffer. They're actually lighter than the UHMW. So it's an interesting thing that we're excited to talk about a little bit more when it's time. So one fun fact about Huge is that if you want it assembled in any place, in any building inside of it, you need to assemble it in that building. Huge does not fit through doors. And if together, Huge has to be on the rolling cart to even have a chance of fitting through double doors to go sideways. And the rolling cart can't climb stairs or any ledges. So generally what that means is we're building Huge wherever we want to show it off. That was fun when one of our sponsors, TTI, oh, that's Mauser, sorry. When one of our sponsors, TTI, had Huge out, I think for a Christmas party or some other party they had, and it was at a country club. And we had to bring Huge up an elevator and assemble it on the second floor of a country club while people were confusingly looking at us and wondering what was going on and who these guys were with wrenches and a bunch of plastic and metal and stuff. And I think that's up there on the list of, things you never expected to do, that you get to do because of robots, and things I'm probably never going to have the opportunity to do again, make a country club deal with us assembling Huge in the back room.
In our second deep dive of the night, we are going to talk about Axolotl versus Ribbot and Ribbot's dominant win.
Yeah, they were working so hard to try to impress the selection committee on this one. They almost got themselves out of the arena with that hit at the end of the match.
Yeah, I'm glad that they didn't waste another 30 pounds on foam this year. It was kind of
It was actually a rule change because of Ribbot last year. Ribbot, with all their foam last year, get everywhere. The arena cleanup crew was spending 10, 15 very expensive minutes cleaning up and dealing with all of that foam. So this year, BattleBots changed the rules so that you can't have foam that just flies everywhere across the arena. Originally, we were concerned that rule might affect us because we use that foam in our tires, so do a lot of other people. But it turned out it wasn't a problem.
Let's talk to David.
One of the major changes we made this season with Ribbot was we swapped from chain to belt drive on our vertical spinner. Last year we noticed that with our chain, even though we had clutches, we were bending our motor shafts. And to remedy this, we thought that switching to a V-belt would be better. Another major change we made this season was towards our undercutter module. Last year we had the undercutter module with us the entire season, but we didn't actually end up running it a single time in the qualification matches. A big reason for this is we were really unsure about the belt system we had going on underneath it. To try to fix the problem we were having with the belt, we swapped to a V-belt instead of a serpentine belt, and we also ended up chaining together the left and right sides of our weapon motors.
This let us have a triangle with the V-belt. We were trying to do some weird wrapping for the serpentine belt last year, and it just got too convoluted and not very robust.
We realized after watching some video that we were having issues with traction last year. This was in big part because we were running individual drive for each of our wheels. To fix this, we made one really tiny change. All we did was we chained together our front and back wheels on either side. Although it doesn't sound like much, it made such a huge difference that one of the pit workers at filming actually asked if we got a new driver this season because it looked like we were so much better in control this year than compared to last year.
So before our first season, we actually didn't have enough time to implement current limiting on our motor controllers. So this off season, we spent a lot of time working on developing current limiting so that we wouldn't ever burn out any motors, and we could actually set torque limits for spin up and have predictable results from driving and weapon spin up. This actually caused us to cut the number of motor controllers in our robot in half. We were able to double up each one of our motors to one motor controller since they're brushed. There's one advantage to being brushed, which is that any number of motors can be hooked up to a motor controller as long as the motor controller doesn't blow up. So we're confident in our drive to go down to 2 for our drive and then 2 motor controllers for our weapon. Saved us a lot of space.
Since Ribbot is a modular robot, we can really choose what weapon we want to use against our opponents. This season, we actually ended up bringing 3 modules, except one of them we never really talk about and we never really show, which is our wedge module. With this module, we really sacrifice our weapon size in favor of a large frontal wedge. Problem is, this module doesn't really lend itself to exciting matches. It's really purely for defense. So unless we have to run it if we're fighting someone like Tombstone, we really don't want to run it for anyone else. So far this season, you've seen us use the vertical spinner against Mad Catter and the undercutter against Axolotl and Tracer. When we know who we're fighting in our next match, the team comes together, has a discussion about which module we want to run. Usually this comes down to some very simple criteria, a big one being, does our opponent have a wedge? If our opponent doesn't have a wedge, it's almost always hands down the undercutter. Another thing for us to take into consideration between the modules is that our vertical spinner has wedgelets. As everyone knows, the floor always wins. When we drive around with the vertical spinner, we're very likely to get caught in the floor seams. However, if we use our undercutter, we can actually drive around the box fully unimpeded. So if we want to move quickly and have maximum mobility, we'll definitely run the undercutter.
So in terms of changing modules, it's pretty straightforward. Our modules are one piece of aluminum that's been machined down into the shape of the front of our robot. And in terms of actually swapping, it's four bolts that we coined the God bolts, because if you lose them,
the module comes out.
Yeah. So they are the only piece of hardware that's actually holding that module in, plus some geometry machined into the front. And then it's 2 wire hookups for either side. Both on the vertical and horizontal, we run 2 sets of motors. They're completely identical in terms of power and motor configuration. So we just have to run the same set of wires up to the front. So some other cool technology that's on our robot is that we've designed our own custom motor controllers. We decided to do this for a couple different reasons. Number one, it's a challenge. Motor controllers are difficult to design, but they're very rewarding and they're a great learning process. Another reason was the reduced cost. Electronics in heavyweight size are extremely expensive, and we probably cut down the actual cost of our electronics by a factor of 4 or something, going from custom hardware versus something off the shelf. The other reason is size. We can dictate the form factor, which actually there's one right here, that fits well in our robot. And this is great because then we can design other features of the robot that work around this. It essentially transmits all of the telemetry data for each ESC on a bus up to the transmitter over the radio, and that communicates to our tablet here. And this is also how we tune ESC parameters. GUI design is not amazing, but that's okay. It gets the job done.
So as many of our fans have realized, we no longer have the phone this season. Unfortunately, at the end of last season, production made it very clear that they didn't want us to bring the foam back. They were having tons of issues with it, causing the biggest mess ever in the BattleBots after every single one of our matches. And they didn't want to deal with cleaning up. They didn't want to deal with some claims for entanglement. They just didn't want any of that foam anymore. So instead, this year we actually swapped to a vacuum form solution. We actually went as far as making our own vacuum former. And there was a couple of really key benefits for this. One, we can make enough heads to last the entire season. Last season we had a small segment with Jenny where she showed our process for making our frog suits for every match, and that required us to bring a lot of tools, and it was super time consuming. It was super messy, and it was overall just a horrible experience. This year we actually made all of our frog heads before the season even started. So we were able to pack them all up in the crate and have no stress at the event in terms of being suited up for every match. Also, I think the biggest thing for us in terms of improving the robot was our frog suit last year weighed a total of 23 pounds. That's way beyond what most teams spend on cosmetic weight. As a result, we kind of had to cut back on weight in other places. We couldn't run as heavy of a weapon as we wanted all the time, or as much armor as we wanted. But this year, instead of being 23 pounds, our frog head weighed just about a pound. So with all those savings, we were actually able to make a lot of the improvements that we did this year. One interesting thing that people should look out for in our following fights and in our past fights is we actually have a little bit of extra artwork on our top plate. If you look very closely, you might see a little bit more frog-related art, but I don't want to spoil it, and I think you should keep an eye out to see it on TV.
Our last deep dive of the night is with Zach and Diana from Skorpios. I think they showed an impressive driving session today, and just proving that you can just wait and perfectly maneuver and ultimately beat Tombstone.
Yeah, they started this match by saying goodbye to Skorpios just in case, and actually came out with a win. I think they surprised everybody.
Yeah, the robot held up really well. They did get a direct tire hit, but luckily the thing stayed on, as wobbly as it was, but it didn't fall off, and they came away with that win.
So some of the upgrades we've made from Season 4 to Season 5 is we've made a new experimental drive system. We took a few ideas from Whiplash and we compressed it, and the new drivetrain has been absolutely amazing. It pushes, it shoves, it's faster, and it doesn't overheat. Skorpios 4 was burning up its motors every 12 minutes, which got really expensive. But the new Skorpios system doesn't show any signs of overheating, which allows us to go 3 minutes at full power, which you get to see in some of our bounty fights. One of the other changes, Donald Hudson kept ripping off our wheels, so we actually changed the way we assemble the wheels, and they're a lot more durable than they used to be, which I think we proved. We proved that one in spades. And the last big change we made was we switched the old weapon, which was a brush system, over to the Castle Creations brushless system they use for 5th scale motors. The new blade turns faster, which is awesome, and it works really well with the saw blade. However, it kept stalling a little bit, which a lot of people have commented on in the match. Castle actually just came out with a censored version of the system. We're getting ready to try for Season 6.
Season 6!
Hopefully, Season 6. Watch the show and we'll get a Season 6. So we've been getting a lot of questions about what repairs we had to make after the Bloodsport fight.
All the repairs. So, the most obvious damage we took during the Bloodsport match was the splayed open frame. So what we had to do was we had to take a cut-off wheel, cut that panel off, and then go over to the Mad Catter team, beg them to use their hydraulic press so we could bend it back into some resemblance of the right shape. And then take everything over to the Lincoln welding tent and beg them to please weld it back into place, which wound up taking a lot longer than I think any of us expected, because they also found cracks throughout the rest of the frame, which they repaired and gave us tips for the future of how to reinforce when we start seeing them with fresh welds. So, next most obvious damage, I would say, is the arm and the blade. So the blade got bent, and I kept trying to use it because weapon operator do. And the blade, because in the bends, was nicking some of the chain. So we had to completely swap out the chain, completely swap out the blade with a non-bent blade. And I'd say the last repair we really had to do...
That shard of metal that was in the speed controller.
Yeah.
The robot was stronger than it was before, because we fixed all the cracks, we reinforced the frame. When we switched to the brushless system, we had about an extra pound to spare, and we ended up using that in the welding booth to put reinforcement in. So as you may have heard, Skorpios was built to take down Tombstone. You have to keep in mind, Orion and I designed this in my garage after Season 1 finished recording. And at the time, the two biggest threats were Tombstone and Season 1 Bite Force, with the tank treads and the lifter. And we decided Tombstone was the bigger target. So we wanted to make a robot that would beat him. And Orion did brilliant engineering to figure all of this out. The front panels are curved AR plates, and by putting a bend into a piece of sheet metal, you automatically make it more rigid, which is one of the things that helps the front scoops take so much impact. Not only that, as you go down the front scoop and go out to the tips, we have those upturned points. We like to call them Skorpios' thumbs. What they do is they actually hook onto robots or high center robots when they drive over top of them. They're sloped up to each other, so they're like a little pyramid right in the middle. If you look at the old Tombstone toy, the Hex Bug, the original Tombstone had a lattice work or an A-frame, and those little hooks were designed to go inside it and grab the frame, so we'd be able to hold them in place, and then that's why we picked the weapon system we did. This was supposed to be a cutting saw that would cut through the pipes that hold the top of Tombstone's weapon on, and then a very Taoist technique is to use your opponent's energy against them. We were hoping the little thumbs would hold Tombstone in place, we would get the chop, and then we would back up and let him spin up. Upon the next impact, it would rip the top of the frame away. It didn't quite work on Tombstone.
Yeah.
I don't know what black magic that the Tombstone team does on those bars, but they were really tough. We hit them directly, and they did not break.
But there are holes.
There are big holes. So if you look at this shot here of the right-hand panel of the robot, you'll notice there's two big gashes in it. And it took me a few minutes to figure out why there were two different spots Tombstone was hitting. The lower one is when Tombstone's wheels are on the ground and he's just normally driving. That's where he hits, and you can see a full outline of the shape of his blade cut into our robot. The top one is when he's actually stuck on our little front spikes. It lifts his blade up, and he hits higher on the robot. And he started to leave a Tombstone-sized hole there, too. The whole left wedge is twisted, which is incredibly impressive if you've ever seen the 2-story tall machine Van Bever Brothers needs to make our wedges. He just twisted the whole front of the wedge assembly. The tires took a huge beating. We actually improved them a lot after Donald Hudson ripped them apart.
So they stayed on!
They stayed on! The tires did what they were supposed to do!
Yay!
I don't believe in wheel guards. I just believe in tougher tires. And the last thing, when we went weapon to weapon with Tombstone, he just about sheared... Don't be sorry. It was worth it. It just about sheared the tooth off our cutting disc. So, it still spun, still hit, it just needed a new disc afterwards.
This fight was epic. This was a dream of mine and Zach's, to go toe-to-toe with a champion, former champion, top dog, in the arena, have a knockdown, drag-out fight, main event. Fantastic.
It was everything we ever hoped. I really wish the fans wouldn't focus on the last minute, or on that count out, because the 2 minutes before that, I think, are some of the most amazing things you will see in the battle box. It was both of us giving it absolutely everything we had. We were both 1-1, and neither of us wanted to go to 1-2. And Ray, thank you for coming out and doing your absolute best. It was a phenomenal fight. And I hope it's one everyone will remember for years.
This week's Chris Roast of the Night is actually from Peter the Bot Whisperer. As episodes go on, he's starting to get a little bit more snarky, and he's not holding back. Take a look what he said about Kraken in the pre-fight interview.
Pete, how will that thing help Kraken against Huge?
I am not sure how they're going to be able to help themselves with Huge here. I mean, Huge has the double-ended bar that they're going to be spinning up with, and anything it's going to catch is going to slice big holes in. Having a little, like, harpoon hook on the end of their nose, I am not sure if that was the best idea.
Yeah, I mean, especially after the fight with Hydra, I think we were all surprised to see another attachment come out against Huge. But Kraken's was surprisingly effective, I thought.
It was, which totally backfired on Peter because he called them out. But, I mean, it definitely seemed to work.
And guess what? That hook is working, Chris Rose. It sure is. Kraken gets to the side, drives Huge into the side of the box with that harpoon attachment. A fantastic design adjustment from Matt Spurk.
I'm just happy to see someone else building attachments that are used to enable them to do things, not just as a keep-away stick.
And Kraken themed it well to the robot too, because it was like a hook.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, harpooning the big white whale of Huge is just like super choice. It's awesome.
And now it's time for this week's Behind the Bots fan question.
Hey everybody, it's Luke with Behind the Bots with this week's top fan question sent in by Cole Grinsteiner, who asks, we've been seeing a transition to brushless motors, but what advantages do they provide? Great question, Cole.
That is a great question, and I think we should give the people what they want, and that is throwing it to Technical T-Rex.
Typical.
Technical T-Rex, Technical T-Rex. The T in T-Rex stands for technical.
We have been seeing a transition to brushless motors, but what advantages do they provide? When it comes to BattleBots, electric motors come in two variants, brushed motors and brushless motors. Over the last few seasons, more and more teams have adopted brushless motors in order to gain a competitive advantage. But why would you choose one over the other? Brushless motors are lower weight for a given power and more efficient than a brushed motor. A brushless motor has more power than the same sized brush motor, meaning faster robots and harder hitting weapons. Because they don't have brushes and commutators like brushed motors do, brushless motors are mechanically simpler with less points of failure within the motor. However, there are reasons many of the established teams like Tombstone, Whiplash, and Witch Doctor have not yet made the transition. Brushless motors are more electrically complex. The biggest limitation in using brushless motors has been the availability of durable and powerful enough ESCs to run them. Brushless motor ESCs also require far more programming and tuning of settings to work at peak performance, a stark contrast to brushed motor simplicity. Many brushless motor systems require delicate sensors to work properly and have been the source of many teams' issues. Lastly, unlike brushed motors, there is no plug-and-play brushless motor system that the builder community agrees is a robust and reliable solution. Every team is trying their own combination of motors, ESCs, sensors, and settings, hoping to be the first to discover the right combination.
For tonight's Thing of the Week. Public service announcement of the week.
That's a new one.
It's a good one.
Yeah, we've seen so many posts on social media about this. Yes, this was Tombstone's second loss this season. But we want to remind everybody that Tombstone is still the king of kinetic energy. That name is not taken lightly.
No, when you design your robot, I think all of us, I think it's safe to say that in the back of your mind, you're thinking, if I fight Tombstone, either you need an attachment for Tombstone, you need an extra robot so that you can throw it in the trash after you fight Tombstone, or you need a really, really good strategy after fighting Tombstone.
Raise your hand if you have a Tombstone wedge.
And honestly, it works, but just a reminder to people, this is part of our frame from the Las Vegas, the Remars fight against Tombstone. And Tombstone caught our wedge, went through our wedge, which is over here in front of the robot.
Which is about quarter-inch steel?
Quarter-inch AR500. Yep. Through that, hit the wheel on this side. So basically, this is supposed to be straight, and hit it this way enough, after going through our wedge, by the way, hit it enough to buckle this complete thing. And and this is 3/4 inch thick 7075 aluminum. So.
And by the way, this is what it looks like when you beat Tombstone. So.
Yeah, you throw at least part of your robot in the trash even if you beat Tombstone.
Yeah, even Skorpios did not come out unscathed in this. They were working on it for 3 days afterwards? It was, take a look at the pictures. It was not a scathing-free event for them.
Speaking of which, we've seen crazy damage on Whiplash, our own robot. The damage photos after Tombstone Aftermath are some of the most gory that we see in all of BattleBots.
So make no mistake, yes, they lost, but yes, they're still scary. That's our show. Tune in next week when stuff happens.
I don't know what stuff he's talking about.
Me neither.
I don't remember, but something happens, I'm sure of it. And until then, watch this great montage of all the dead robots this week.
Rotator relishes his first win of the season. Rotator is delighted with his win over Big Dill.
Delighted.
Yeah, got it.
I get it. I see what you did there.
Let's redo it.
I thought you would.
Delicious.
Delectable.
Delirious.
That's more like it.
Yeah, I'm glad that they didn't waste another 30 pounds on foam this year. It was kind of
It was actually a rule change because of Ribbot last year.
I do not want some more, Ray.
No,
I never want
please God,
any more.
no.
Could I have less?
Could I have less? Could I return some of the stuff I have, actually?
Could I return some of this?
Technical T-Rex, technical T-Rex, T in T-Rex stands for technical. That's it.
Meaning faster robots